Um, Greetings. It's January 28th. I particularly I just put in a breath mint as though I'm actually talking live, which is good. Makes it more realistic. I wanted to share a thing about Catholic mysticism and unpackaging it a little bit, and specifically correlating it to divine Eros. And the reason I'd wanted to share a thing about it today is because in the Catholic tradition, today is the feast of Thomas Aquinas. And, he's someone who's been very misappropriated, similar to how Christ has been misappropriated, or how Socrates has been misappropriated. And so I just thought I could share, again, there's the breath mint, because I'm making it like I'm actually talking to humans, which is nice. Feels more realistic. So I wanted to share, to maybe just try to set the record straight a little bit about who Thomas Aquinas is and how he is, and also just about divine Eros in general. Yeah? So, where to begin? So he lived in the 13th century, yeah, and is kind of known as this heavy hitter theologian in the church, and known for his dogma, was very significant, like that he was all about doctrine and things. When in reality, Thomas was someone who was a great lover of humanity, a great lover of God, a great lover of what is, yeah? And what I mean by what is simply, in Latin, there's this phrase, id quod est, which is defined as that which is. And Thomas Aquinas had a great love for what is, whether that be the vegetative life, the plants, or animal life, or human life, angelic life, or the ipsum esse subsistens, which is Latin, as he would say, God's very self. And so this whole idea that came on after Aquinas died, about Thomism, is actually contrary to what Thomas would have been about. He was very much a realist. And so as people will talk about animism and being an animist, which comes from the Latin root anima, meaning soul, that all that is has soul and has life, Thomas, if in a mystical way, would have concurred with that, yeah? Because all that is matters and is viewed with life. And so what's really curious about this idea of Catholic mysticism and how it's been so hidden and been so, let me start there. It's been hidden, let me think. Well, let me go back to some history here. So Thomas dies in the 1300s. But when he died, how he died was in 1270. He died in 1274. But in 1273, he kind of everything he had written, he ended up saying that everything was like straw in comparison to the face of love of the beloved, and forwent a lot of what he kind of stood for when it came from this quote dogmatic way. And so he was smitten by God's very self, and smitten by life and humanity, and said that all that he had written was like nothing in comparison to all of that. And then so much so that he, towards the end of his life and in his last final few days, he was surrounded by monks, and asked that they recite to him aloud the Song of Songs, which is it's a book in scripture, 8 chapters long, and is a very erotic, divinely and humanly erotic book, and that's how it began. Yeah, so the book of the Song of Songs begins, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth." "Draw me after you" is a couple verses down. "My lover belongs to me, I belong to him." And this is the book, the poetry that Thomas wanted read to him by his fellow friars, mind you, as he breathed his last. So if you want to fact check me on that, it's coming from G.K. Chesterton, who's a pretty conservative Catholic theologian, from a book called The Dumb Ox. When he's talking about, he's kind of referring to telling stories. He talks about Thomas Aquinas in a more anecdotal way. And so, yeah, I just share some of the heart of who he is, because he ended up becoming this, what the church called the angelic doctor of the church. And he ended up in the late 1800s. Pope Leo XIII wrote a document, Aeterni Patris, this something called an encyclical, and in there it was on Christian philosophy, and Pope Leo XIII proceeded to say that Thomas Aquinas was the preeminent philosopher, and Thomism ought to be the preeminent philosophy of the church, and such would be contrary to what Thomas himself experienced and to what Thomas himself was even about. Yeah, because he wasn't about Thomism, he was about realism and about love and about honoring life on her terms and being in symbiosis with life on her terms, which is mysterious and unquantifiable and therefore non-dogmatic. So curious move by Pope Leo XIII to make him a, quote, preeminent philosopher, and calling it something like Thomism, because it just, can't say, that would be contrary to what he was about. And so just to share some more about this idea of what I mean by divine Eros, in Greek, there's 26 different ways to describe love. In English, we just have love. I love your hoodie. I love your Warby Parker glasses. I love your mom. Mom, I love you. I love. Yeah, but but in Greek there's many different words. A couple of which that are more known would be like agape, meaning a sacrificial or selfless love, or filial love, philia meaning a love for a daughter or a son or a child. Yeah, and then eros, right, which would be like a more erotic or desirous love. And so when I say divine Eros and correlating it with Catholic mysticism, it was that Eros that compelled the mystics, that including Thomas Aquinas, and John of the Cross is another one, and Teresa of Avila, Therese of Lisieux, Bernard of Clairvaux, or some that come to mind and heart, that were compelled by a love that brings pause. By a love that brings pause. Teresa of Avila had this beautiful act of charity that she would recite from kind of, the bowels of her being. And she cried out, your love so holds my heart that if there were no heaven, I would still love you with the same love. And it was that love that compelled them forward. And so divine Eros is really the essence of what Christ was about, really the essence of what, for this, I just want to, I'm pulling up something here. It was the essence of why, there's a passage that Christ talks about, Yeshua, that no greater love is there than for a man to lay down, for man or woman, a person to lay down their life for one's friends. And so because the love is so passionate and so erotic and so desirous that one's ready and willing to lay down their life for the other. And the other could be, the forest, could be the sacred waters and rivers, could be the earth and the soil that's below our feet. Could be those who are on the fringes of society who in any capacity in which they might be, our brothers and sisters who are in nursing homes against their own volition, or so it's a love that's impregnated with a deep desire and a desire to give of oneself. And so some things I just wanted to share when thinking about divine Eros, and just to kind of give some substance to what I'm sharing, that I'm not speaking out of my just rear end, if you will. I just have a quote here that Thomas talks about, Thomas Aquinas, whose feast day it is, as I've said, quote, "But I'm not ashamed to say that I find my reason fed by my senses, that I love a great deal, and what I think to what I see, and that I owe a great deal of what I think to what I see and smell and taste and handle, and that so far as my reason is concerned, I feel obliged to treat all this reality as real. I owe a great deal to what I see and smell and taste and handle." And it's like, yes, as a matter of fact, we owe a great deal to our sensual selves, and through our sensual selves we can, and we do, in fact, encounter divinity, and encounter God and Christus. Yeah, this is some of what we're sharing, just trying to share in an authentic, organic way, not in any sort of pageantry, on like a Monday evening from Brooklyn. So I see some of you who've checked in there. Passantino, we did share about some of this stuff, and when I was in Kansas City last. Good to see you, Lisa Bondi, aka Bondi. Let me see what else comes to mind and heart. Your love so holds my heart, right? If there were no heaven, I would still love you with the same love. I guess I'd be curious to think about, why is it that, I'm 38 years old, and anytime I've been to Holy Mass in the world, not as a Catholic nun, I don't think I've ever heard any Catholic priest preach about mysticism or divine Eros, or unpackaging it, or the idea of lover and beloved, or as G.K. Chesterton says, Catholicism, quote, "Catholicism is the greatest love affair ever to exist." And that is curious, I think, what's up? Why would no Catholic priest, and I have respect, I'm not saying it in a spiteful way, I'm saying it genuinely in a very curious way. How has that just not come up, when it seems very much to be the essence of what Christus was about? Christ, the time that he lived in historically, was one that was much more aware of the elements all around us, and how resourced we are by the rivers and by the soil, and by the breaking of bread that was baked very simply and very with the fire right there. And so, I say that just because the context in which he was living in, I think, is one that so many of us are also being summoned to, and wanting to kind of dive deeper into a deeper, more communal way of life with our surroundings, and with not only humans, but with all the surroundings. The elements, as I've been calling them. But what's that about? That folks aren't, who have this power and have this clout, Catholic priests, why aren't they unpackaging Catholic mysticism and divine Eros? And for anyone who is watching now, or who'll tune in later, I encourage you to take a moment, or many moments, to sit with the Song of Songs. It's a profound book. It's just 8 chapters long, and not linear, and not simple to understand, and is profound, magical silencing poetry. And I will say, as I woke up this morning and went to Holy Mass, daily Mass here in Brooklyn at 8:30, I, as I approach communion, I will drop in and say, "Oh, that you might kiss me with the kisses of your mouth," and call to mind and heart just the intimacy and the encounter that happens in Holy Communion. And so it's for real, the Song of Songs. It's something that can live in in your bones, just like any good poetry can, right? And can really imbibe and inflame us. So, please, Lisa, Bondi, what's your question? I wish you could ask it live. Which is why I want to do the things on Zoom eventually. Thank you, Jason Schott, for your kindness. Welcome, Stephen Keene from CUA. Lisa Bondi. So I think... okay. I see. Bondi, thank you. The question is one that's about your ancestors. Let me table it in this moment, and let's connect on either text. Let's text about it on Facebook Messenger or between one another's phone numbers. That'd be great, and I'd be happy to speak to that for sure. I wanted to try to speak a little bit in this F-Book Live to divine Eros and Catholic mysticism and stir up some things a little bit there in a sweet way. As I say stir up things because, again, I want to quote, because it's fun to quote things, right? I think, when you're a wannabe intellectual, it's nice to have substance behind what you're saying. But Chesterton, again, who is a pretty conservative Catholic theologian, philosopher, writer, I am looking very forward to having opportunities to speak more truth to power on some of these matters around divine Eros, and also to the mutual reinforcing ideas of and camps of the elements and Catholic mystical teaching, and how those two are actually complementary and reinforcing and not mutually exclusive. And I came across this as I was reading more and being a little bit more immersed in Thomas Aquinas today. And Chesterton says, and I quote, it's from page 7, so good, from this book called The Dumb Ox about Thomas Aquinas. Quote, he's talking about Thomas Aquinas and Francis of Assisi, which many of you also know, another great lover. Quote, they were not bringing something new into Christianity in the sense of something heathen or heretical into Christianity. On the contrary, they were bringing Christianity into Christendom, into the heart of what it was about. But they were bringing it back against the pressure of certain historic tendencies, which had hardened into habits in many great schools and authorities of the Christian church. And they were using tools and weapons which seemed to many people to be associated with heresy or heathenry. St. Francis used nature, much as St. Thomas Aquinas used Aristotle, and to some they seemed to be using a pagan goddess and a pagan sage. So I just quote that because there's been some talk or questions as to whether or not I, Lindsay Sudeikis, consider myself Catholic, and if I'm a practicing Catholic, and how can I be Catholic if I also hold other truths, and is that possible? And I must say I felt validated in my bones today to come across someone saying that, people too great, incredible, profound shakers and movers, of which I am not, but long to be a shaker and mover, not for my sake, but for the sake of love and for the greater awakening of all that is, and for the healing, deep, deep healing that's needed within the one holy Catholic apostolic tradition, of which has a history of empire and a history of hegemony and a history of dogmatism, and that many of us who might have Catholicism in our lineages or who are currently Catholic could very well be complicit in some of those cultural themes, and what is our responsibility to what is our responsibility to thank you, Amy Haber, praise be, for saying that. Yeah, but what's our responsibility to those ills, to those troubles? And I'm not saying, I'm not anti-Catholic, and I'm not anti the one Holy Catholic Apostolic Church. What I am saying, though, and what I was happy to read that what Chesterton is saying is that people like St. Francis of Assisi and people like St. Thomas Aquinas question and critiqued what was going on in the Catholic Church in the 1200s, in the 1100s, 1200s, and the 1300s. Yeah, and what I'm doing and what I'm saying is I'm questioning and critiquing not only what's going on with the Catholic Church in the 2000s, but what has gone on historically. And so again, this line about, they were using, Thomas Aquinas and Francis of Assisi were using tools and weapons which seemed to many people to be associated with heresy. St. Francis used nature, much as Thomas Aquinas used Aristotle, and to some they seemed to be using a pagan goddess and a pagan sage. And what I would say is that they were just simply using or honoring or stewarding reality on her terms, yeah, and life on her terms. And so, yeah, I think the phrase and the mystery of divine Eros and of the mystical tradition is what compels me and what could compel many persons to combat the prejudices and the ugliness and the toxicities of empire and hegemony and dogmatism. And so, the saint or the persons who long to be saints are medicines to the world and are an antidote to the world. And I have a niece and nephew who I've been able to commune with a bunch in these last few days, and since I've been back from this incredible ancestral pilgrimage to Greece and Lithuania, and little Otis and Daisy, when they're sick, they actually don't want to take the medicine. There's a lot of pushing away and not wanting to consume it, knowing that the medicine will help to soothe them and will help ultimately to make them feel better. And so I just make that analogy because I think folks, those of us who want to bring healing and embody medicine, it doesn't always land so easily for those who maybe are in need of the medicine. And in this case, I'm speaking lovingly and tenderly to my fellow Catholics, and specifically to Catholic priests and brother priests who, for some reason, aren't unpackaging divine Eros and aren't immersing themselves in the world of the senses and the sensual, which in fact their faith is contingent upon. The Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 14 says, the Word became flesh, and yet the Catholic Church isn't really honoring in any way, shape, or form the flesh, and just aren't really talking about it a whole lot. So, that's just some of what is on the heart. I would be happy to continue the dialogue with anyone who's feeling it. Thanks for those of you who are checking in and taking a moment to listen in. God knows that I'm not going on F-Book Live to share about divine Eros for merely my own sake, but it's something that I feel God and my people and life are inviting me into. And so I'm just trying to pray through and discern through what are creative, culturally relevant ways to do that. ultimately for people to be, more emboldened and more fully human, and more healed up in the ways that they want to be, and in the ways that our culture and all the cultures that all of us are from are longing to be. So, yeah. Good. Greetings to who's just there. Thank you. I appreciate that, Julie Dunlap. Amen. Good. Amanda Francesca, good to see you. And Georgia Webster, Whitby, shout out. So, yeah, I said, I mentioned on my little website that I'd go on FBook Live from 7:30 to 8:15, and I feel at 8:02 that maybe that's what I have to share. So, if anyone wants to tag in with a question, those of you who are watching, this is the moment. Thank you for sharing. Okay, yeah. Yeah, Ali Skekalusi, he is, this book, The Demox, is good, and also his work, I can't remember the title of it, of St. Francis of Assisi. And, Chesterton, also get ready, he's writing in the context in which he's writing in, just to be mindful of that. I would suggest with his bias that we all kind of are walking in and writing in, no matter what time period we're writing in. So including my own bias, right? So that'd be my only thing. I think when I read Chesterton, and most things, I think I take what I like and I leave the rest. So, yeah. Good. But respect. All right. Good. Blessings. This behind me, this is a photo. You can't totally see it, but I can't remember. It's called The Suffering of Light. Wow. Well, there it is. Good. I thought that was an appropriate backdrop when speaking about divine Eros, right? So poetic, the suffering of light. Yeah, praise, it was a gift. So, all right, good. Peace, blessings on anyone who's seeing this now and who's seeing it later. Yeah, ciao.